Hey there, authors and appreciators. This is Fictitious, a podcast about writing and genre storytelling, presented by Nerd for a Living. I'm Adrian Buskey. This is another prequel episode, a rebroadcast from our flagship show, Nerd for a Living. It's a conversation I had at San Diego Comic-Con 2015 with Daniel H. Wilson, the New York Times bestselling author of ROBOPOCALYPSE and its sequel, ROBOGENESIS. His books also include How to Survive a Robot Uprising, A Boy and His Bot, and Amped. For a young guy, Daniel's had a pretty wild career, spanning books, television, and comics. And if it seems like he has an obsession with robots, keep in mind that he literally has a PhD in robotics and a master's in artificial intelligence. And yes, those are real degrees. We are actually living in the future. His book, ROBOPOCALYPSE, was optioned by DreamWorks and was in development by Steven Spielberg, though the film has been in production limbo for several years now. I hung out with Daniel on the exhibition floor at San Diego Comic-Con to talk about Press Start to Play, an anthology of video game-inspired short stories that he co-edited. And we chatted about all the other crazy places his writing career has taken him. Daniel, first off, let's talk about the new anthology. So, how did that idea come together, and what did you do to execute this anthology based around the idea of video games in all their forms and how it touches life and culture?
Well, so I co-edited the anthology with John Joseph Adams, like editor extraordinaire, and we worked together before on Robot Uprisings. And basically, as everybody knows, video games are a bigger industry than the movie industry at this point, and video games largely exist to deliver stories to people. And so, on one hand, we were really excited to see how many science fiction authors out there were huge gamers and would be interested in writing a story about video games, but also the people out there who are writing the actual video games that we're all playing. And we think of how many people have gone through, like Chris Avellone, he wrote Fallout New Vegas. Like, how many people have lived in Fallout New Vegas for hours and hours and hours? What would that person who wrote that narrative experience write in a short story form? And so we named each short story after some aspect of video games. My story is called God Mode, and we have, like, it goes from there. And really it was just like a big experiment to see what we get. And the stories were awesome, so we knew we had to put it together.
So when you came time to find those people, what methodology did you use to locate the writers and piece it together?
Methodology is like a big word to use for finding. It's basically like, I like to collaborate with John because he has really got all of his tentacles out in the industry. He runs Lightspeed magazine and Nightmare magazine. He kind of cut his teeth on the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. He knows everybody, and also a lot of up-and-comers. And then, of course, I have my friends that I can corral and force into writing stories for me. So, like Andy Weir and Ernie Klein, he wrote the foreword. He was on the hook for a story, but he wiggled off the hook, and I got him for the foreword.
He still contributed. That counts, right?
Oh, he did. And of course, I really want to hear his perspective. I'm fascinated to see, what he's going to do. Hugh Howey, some of these more science fiction writers who, it's really interesting now to see what they've done.
I figure that it's going to be refreshing for somebody who writes video games to write a short story, so that you either don't have to write 9 different versions of a story, or what a scene could be, or what the dialogue changes are. Because, writing for video games, some of them are very linear, but a lot of them with these open worlds and varying,
little quests.
There's a lot of room for involvement. I think that more and more of these stories, the Mass Effects of the world and stuff, where you can change the story as you're going along, and really is interactive fiction in its truest sense. It's a real challenge for writers to put this together.
And it's definitely not the way you write a short story necessarily. So I've never written a video game, except I wrote a little iOS app called Mayday Deep Space, which has branching storylines. And the thing that blew me away actually writing that is how brief you have to be. When someone's playing the game or they're sitting there talking to the character, there's not a lot of time for getting flowery with your dialogue and stuff. It's like you need to deliver what's happening,
Right. Yeah, not everybody gets to be Metal Gear Solid and just make or any of the Metal Gear games where you have to watch a cutscene for 40 hours before you can get back to the gameplay.
It's amazing to me, what's happened to my ability to concentrate over the years. I'm playing The Witcher 3 right now, and it's made me cry. That game, there's a little quest that was so intense, I was like, a little tear came out. And then there's other times when I'm just like, get on with it. Like, I don't care. Like, hurry up. And so, you never know. That's a totally different domain, and that's why it was really fascinating to see how it would map, how a video game writer would write a short story.
Well, it's interesting to look at like the way things have changed from like the early interactive fiction, just text-based adventures. I mean, I think everybody knows like the Douglas Adams,
Zork.
Yes, all that stuff. Like, it was hugely influential. But yeah, you were reading a book that was changing, based on your decisions.
Yeah,
and I think that we've seen a resurgence of those with the apps and stuff now too. So like video game is like, I feel like it's broadening again after kind of getting like really first-person shootery.
Yeah.
I have to remark on a side note that I just noticed you're wearing a Johnny Five shirt, and that's awesome.
Oh yeah.
I love
He's so chappy you couldn't kill him.
I appreciate that. So stepping back from that, I mean, so you have a number of novels. Like you mentioned the Robot Uprisings. There's a Boy.
That's an anthology. Yeah.
And you have something that's been optioned, that's in production with Spielberg attached to it.
So I wrote a novel called ROBOPOCALYPSE, and that was purchased by DreamWorks, and Spielberg's attached to it as a director. I don't know when it'll get made. It's delayed right now. It almost went into production a few years ago, so at this point, emotionally, I've just cut myself off from it. I'm trying to be very Vulcan about, watching that progress.
I feel like, production hell is like, I mean, it's getting optioned is like the dream, and then everybody has that like, the nightmare is that you may sit on it for a long time.
Well, part of my career, the way that my career has worked is the very first book I wrote was optioned, and that extra cash sort of influx is what made it possible for me to write full time. And so having my work optioned has always been a part of my choice to be a writer as opposed to a roboticist.
So that's a good segue there, because when we look at people's career paths into stuff, obviously like writers is one of those arenas, especially in like the nerd culture world, is very forefront. We know those people, we idolize them, and they create the things in the worlds that we love. But the background that gets them there is pretty interesting. And when we talk about nerdy stuff, I mean, your background's in robotics.
Yeah.
And then you also did TV based around like how things work and the background of how stuff goes. So what was that career path? How did you go from who's working with robot
in
toys
retrospect, it's pretty crazy. So I grew up loving science fiction and wanting to be a scientist, and also wanting to be a science fiction author. I mean, I read a lot of short stories, and I just thought, that's all I did, really. So as a teenager, I wrote short stories, and I tried to send them off, and they were rejected. And so for me, learning how to program a computer really felt like a way for me to express myself. Like, I could make a game. Like, I could think of a game in my head, and then programming was a way to get it out of my head and into the world. And so I studied computer science at the university up the street from where I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So the University of Tulsa. And while I was there, I was really lucky because my undergraduate advisor, allowed me to work with his graduate students on their research, and they were researching genetic algorithms, right? And it's like science fiction and science are like colliding. I mean, it's like, that's math, genetic algorithms, but it's an approach where you figure out the answer by using natural selection to like breed different answers, and you keep the best ones and they mix each other. It's really cool, and it really caught my imagination. So after I finished that degree, I was like, I gotta, what am I gonna do? I wanted to go to graduate school. I didn't want to program computers for a living. I was really caught up in this AI, and so I was able to get into the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon, and I went out to Pittsburgh and basically got a PhD in robotics. And right when I was finishing, when I was about to defend my thesis, I had this idea to write a silly book called How to Survive a Robot Uprising. It was nonfiction. I literally just asked all my professors like what they do, like, people that had humanoid robots or autonomous vehicles or snake robots, underwater robots. There's all kinds of machines out there. And the book did okay, and it got optioned. And so I had a fork in the road, and that happened right when I graduated. So I went out and I interviewed for jobs to be a roboticist, and I started thinking about what my next book could be. And then I was like, I know I went and got a whole PhD, but forget it. I'm just gonna I'm gonna keep doing the writing thing until it peters out.
Sure.
And I figured, maybe a year or two, and then I'll go back, and it'll be a little harder to get a job, but I'll be okay. And then it just kind of kept going, and I kept getting new opportunities. That's the great thing about writing is that you put something out into the world and it floats around, and like people pick it up and then they go, oh, I bet this guy could do this too, you know. And so that's how I ended up hosting a television show on the History Channel. My 10 episodes, and I was not renewed, unfortunately.
Well, still though, I mean, that's, you know, you still made 10 episodes. You talked about production hell, just getting a show to go.
Oh yeah,
is such a challenge. I mean, was that something that, like, did you pilot and then sit on it, or did you go straight to series? Or
we shot a pilot, and then we went to series from that, and we did our 10 episodes. I mean, it was hellacious. Any TV show host you see on TV, that is a hard job, man. I don't envy anybody out there like on the road shooting television for a living, because that is hard stuff. I am lazy. You know, I do not need to be out there like.
Well, that's why you're a writer, so you can sit in your cave and work on your stuff, not necessarily be out there like.
It's true. I live in my head. You know, like I have adventures inside my head. Or in the video game, I'm like, I just would rather wander through the woods in The Witcher 3. You know, it's very pretty.
But I gotta think that experience probably exposed you to a lot of things you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Oh my God!
Coming from this robotics background, I'm sure the people that you were working with and the ideas that they were broaching have probably bled over to your work. I mean,
of course. No, I mean,
yeah.
Honestly, the whole thing, I've been very lucky because I've always just done what I was interested in. You know, I really like robotics. I really like the math even. I mean, I like everything about it. I really like writing science fiction. I like thinking about robots in the future and all that. I mean, I'm really, really, really lucky, I feel like, because it's actually fun for me. And I have to write about robots, you know? Like, who's going to buy something from me? Like, when I try to go do my romance, you know, nobody's going to be buying that from me. But I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm interested in robots. I always have been.
That's okay. That's what pseudonyms are for. You know?
Yeah, right.
You can go try something
out
else.
There,
yeah,
get my bodice ripper career jump started.
You know, you can write that like from the can, you know, like in a couple of months and kick that out, no biggie. You know?
Yeah.
A lot of, you know, especially in the digital realm, you can experiment with those things.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I could do like.
But you know, you could go do robot erotica. I mean, we've got dinosaur erotica and some other things that are selling really well.
There's got to be robot erotica.
Oh,
right?
I'm sure there. Well, I mean, we've had it as far back as like at least the 1920s, right? I mean, that's kind of what Metropolis sort of was.
I'm gonna steer us back away from this.
Yeah,
it's gonna go to a bad place really quick.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So back to serious topics of real professionalism.
Right,
so,
right.
So the book comes out in August, right?
Yeah, August. I think August 18th or August 19th.
So you're here at San Diego pre-promoting on that, or do you actually have?
We gave away a ton of free copies of the book. We had a ton of authors here signing. So Hugh Howey was here, Austin Grossman, my co-editor John Joseph Adams. We had Shannon McGuire and Rhiannon Pratchett and Jessica Brady. So we had a lot of great, you know, authors here. I think there's 26 stories in there, so it's a lot to keep track of.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I'm sure, like, just in the process of putting the book together, like, that's kind of a nightmare. I mean,
yeah. Well, and Andy Weir is wandering around here. He contributed an awesome story. The idea is basically an AI learns basically how to speak and become sentient from, like, the equivalent of, like, 4chan comments. So it is the dirtiest short story, the foulest mouth AI that you've ever read about. I can't even tell people the stuff it says. You know, it's so funny.
The joke is always that now, when the internet becomes sentient, that its first impression of humanity is going to cause it to wipe us out just out of principle. Because it's going to look around, it's just going to read the comments and like, nope, delete humanity.
Somewhere there's a counter, and every time somebody sends a dick pic, it goes up one, and it's going to hit some limit, and then boom.
It's the midnight clock, you know, like the doomsday clock. We're like 2 minutes to midnight, and every one of those things takes us a little further. One more racist comment in the comments, and it's all over.
Oh my God.
So after this book gets out, I mean, I imagine you're probably doing a bit of press tour, and
we're out talking about it. I'm not sure where. With an anthology, it's a little bit weird, you know, because I did contribute a story, but I'm mostly the editor, you know. So I have one story right up. I made it the first story, which I'm a little embarrassed that I did. But hey, man, you know, I edited the thing.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, like we're going to be talking to press and just like trying to get the word out. But what's great is there's so many contributors from so many different areas, and they all have their own fans, you know. And so we're hoping that allows it to really reach out, and people are able to explore all these authors authors through the other authors, you know? It's like a science fiction community, you know, and that's how that works. That's why I love anthologies.
Anthologies are fantastic too because they allow you to explore a new idea in a succinct fashion without necessarily worrying too much on the mechanics.
Yeah.
You know, like it's like you don't have to belabor the logic that might fall apart eventually.
It is because of it's a short form.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also sort of a relief when somebody calls you up and says, "Hey, we'd like for you to contribute to this anthology. It's about this," and then it's like Cards Against Humanity or something. You know, you get a little bit, and then your mind starts running with it, and you're able to come up with a cool idea. You know.
Creativity works with just a little bit of boundaries.
Yeah.
If you box it in a little bit, like thematic, giving it to people and giving them some fun with, and
Definitely.
even just like some of the descriptions you guys have, like it on Amazon and whatever, like the playful way that it handles the concept of gaming and the language of gaming is great.
Yeah, we got these bookmarks that we're giving out, and I love. They say it's dangerous to go alone. Take this, which is that scene in Zelda, right?
Yeah.
And just all the art, you know, I mean, like all the retro sort of Atari-looking art. Like, it's just there's so much culture that's already embedded in video games, and it's so funny because it's in all of our DNA. Because I mean, how long has Zelda been around, right? I mean, people of all ages game. Like, video games have just evolved so much that it's just a really great area to exploit, you know, to write stories about.
I did an award show recently, and one of the keynote speaker was a guy who works for Virgin Galactic. He's like their sort of creative director for them, and he talked about how the science fiction that he read as a child influenced what he wanted to do, and like he's like, I want to make spaceships, I want to send people to space, and now he's actively doing that. And he's talking about how like science and the explosion of technology has largely been influenced by science fiction, and I feel like video games now is kind of operating that similar kind of space where like it is expanding ideas, or
There's a whole new generation of people that grew up playing video games and are getting their science fiction-y kind of concepts from those interactions. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That was one thing that surprised me, you know, when I was interviewing roboticists for, you know, well, I interview roboticists all the time, you know. Half of them are my friends, and I got to stay up to date, you know.
Of course, yeah.
But, like, I was really surprised to find that pretty much every scientist is inspired by some science fiction. And usually it's really personal, too. It's, like, really special, you know. Like, there's the moment, you know, when I was a kid, and I saw this, and I took my breath away, and I was like, I got to make that. And you wouldn't necessarily think that. You'd think of scientists as these boring people in laboratories and things. But they're building science fiction. Yeah, that's great.
They have taken science fiction as a challenge.
Yeah.
You thought that was fanciful 50 years ago. We sat down to practically work it out. The creative minds and the practical minds and the union between, like, is pretty rad. So
yeah, it's awesome.
Both sides are very nerdy in their own ways, and when they come together, like, great things happen. Until the robots take over and destroy us all.
Yeah, whatever. We're all,
That's probably a pretty good idea, too.
We're all meat.
Yeah. So after this is over, what's next? Do you have the next thing on the agenda lined up?
Oh, in terms of projects?
Yeah.
So right now I've got a monthly series for DC Comics called Earth 2 Society, where I've got all my heroes. I got Power Girl and Huntress and Dick Grayson as Batman, Val Zod, Superman, Alan Scott, Green Lantern. I got the whole crew, and they're showing up to a brand new planet. And the thought experiment, really, and the comic is, what does a new society look like if you build it with all the advanced technology that they have in their spaceships, and then also with the help of superheroes? What comes out of that? And it's been super fun. And of course, I work in as much sci-fi as I can. I mean, they show up into a solar system that's got a binary star system, so I got a red sun and a yellow sun, so my Kryptonians are like, they get depowered sometimes, and other times they're... So I got Earth 2 Society as a monthly, and then I have a graphic novel called Quarantine Zone that's going to be coming out in January. The concept there is, what if evil, like the capacity to do evil, was a virus that you could cure? And what is that? So it's some Twilight Zone shit. It's like, what happens to society then, you know? And of course there's a quarantine zone where the incurables are sent, you know? You gotta keep all those evil people cooped up.
Right. But that's not a recipe for disaster.
No, hey man, it all ends real fun. No, I mean, but there's some great thematic stuff, you know, like what does it mean to be good, right? If you can't be evil at all, you know? Is there any more meaning to it at all? But yeah, so that, and then I'm writing screenplays for you know, I'm writing a script for Lionsgate, and I'm writing for some other stuff. We'll see if that ever gets produced. But.
So, like you were saying earlier, very lazy.
I'm a lazy
Not
man.
doing anything.
I walk to the coffee shop, and then after that, my body goes into like standby mode, except for my brain.
Background process just going, or like the wheels spinning up front, but things are getting done somewhere. So
Yeah, I gotta lift the coffee to my mouth. That's about it.
Quickly, how did you make the transition into comics? How'd that leap happen?
That was ROBOPOCALYPSE was a bestseller, and it really got out there, and a lot of people loved it, and so DC were some of those people, and so they reached out because of the world building involved, and like the world destroying.
They're fond of that too, yeah.
Well, I started out on Earth 2 doing World's End, where I blew up their previous planet. So sorry about that,
Bummer, guys.
Bummer, dude. I gave him a new planet. What are you gonna do?
So you just like walked in the door and just Michael Bay'd that shit, just like boom, like over.
Like how? Yeah, no. I mean, there's a lot of people that work on comics, and so I kind of did my part, but there were 2 other writers on World's End, and all the artists and letters and editors, and that's an amazing process too. It's a really collaborative process.
So the new Earth 2 book, is that part of the relaunch of the DC universe?
Yeah. So it's Earth 2 Society #1 just came out in June, and it's just me writing it, and Jorge Jimenez is doing the art. This dude is ridiculous. I keep giving him as many splash pages as I can because I just can't wait to see it. My background on my phone changes every week because he sends new art, and I'm like, oh shit, I gotta put that up.
Well, I mean, one of the most fantastic things about writing comics, if you are not an artist, is setting it off and then having that interpretation come and land. And the first time you see the pencils, and you're like, oh my god, everything in my head is in front of me. But they did it better.
And and it's amazing how quickly they do it. That is like a superpower.
Yes.
Being able to just take a blank sheet of paper and draw some of the stuff that they draw, and they do it fast. It's amazing.
Yeah,
and I love it. I love that instant gratification.
And I'm sure like Jorge's like sitting and he's like fast. He's like, that took me 15 hours.
Yeah. Well,
but for us,
pretty much daily.
Yeah, CG artists would take 40 to 60 hours to build that.
Yeah,
thing.
Jorge's a CG. He uses a pad, because the first thing I saw, I was like, hey man, let me buy that. Like, I want that. And he's like, it's on the computer, buddy.
Yeah, there's no originals of this stuff. Yeah.
I'm like a little disappointed about that. I kind of wish there was an artifact out there somewhere.
Yeah, there's maybe you could ask him to do a hybrid style for you on one of them, where he can print out his blue lines and then do actual pencils on top of it.
That's a good idea.
That's how a lot of the comic artists are making their money, by still having an original version of something to
sell.
Yeah, because otherwise, people are like, I want that, and they're like, it doesn't exist. It's only digital and tangible. So, well, Daniel, thank you so much. I mean, you've got such an amazing number of projects up in the air, and I think that's great because you're showing how, as a storyteller and somebody who comes from a couple of different nerd disciplines, that you can keep applying those skills in different arenas and use your storytelling and your abilities across genres and mediums. So that's super awesome.
Thanks, man. It's my pleasure.
Well, good luck with the book. Hopefully, it sells like crazy, and maybe there'll be like 19 volumes of it afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be rad. I think there's some video game fans out there.
There's a few. I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Fictitious. Press Start to Play is available now. You can find out more about Daniel, including his upcoming novel, The Clockwork Dynasty, at his website, danielhwilson.com. The home for Fictitious and all of the Nerd for a Living family of podcasts is nerdforaliving.com. Check out our full archive of episodes, sign up for our mailing list, and then follow us on Twitter, where we are at Nerd for a Living. I'm on there too, as at Adrian Buskey. Tweet at us to tell us who you'd love to hear on this show next. Fictitious is available on iTunes and many other apps and services. Subscribe for more interviews with awesome creators. Then go write us a review if the spirit so moves you. It helps other people find our show, which helps us bring you more excellent guests. This podcast is produced by Wendy Buskey and me, Adrian Buskey. Fictitious and the Nerd for a Living family of podcasts are a production of Armadian Media. Now, until next time, my author friends, get back to writing.